Life had never been easy for Laura and me. We struggled to make ends meet, caught in the endless cycle of working long hours and still barely getting by. I worked at a local store, doing everything from stocking shelves to cleaning up, often pulling night shifts that left me exhausted. Laura had a job at an info line, and though it was steady work, it didn't pay nearly enough to cover our growing expenses. Between our rent, car maintenance, and basic needs, it seemed like we were always just one unexpected bill away from disaster. The stress of constantly worrying about money took its toll. We often found ourselves arguing over the smallest things: a grocery list, a forgotten errand, or the price of gas. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. We just couldn't escape the relentless pressure of our financial situation. Laura, in particular, seemed more and more discontent. I couldn't blame her. Our lives had become a dull routine of work, worry, and sleep, with little room for anything else. One evening, as we sat at our tiny kitchen table eating a meager dinner, Laura broke the silence. "We can't keep living like this," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Something has to change. We're just existing." I saw the desperation in her eyes and felt a pang of guilt. I had tried my best, but it wasn't enough. "What do you suggest?" I asked, though I wasn't sure there was a solution. We had already tried budgeting and cutting back, but nothing seemed to make a significant difference. She hesitated for a moment before suggesting, "What if we played the lottery? Just once. It's a long shot, but at this point, what do we have to lose?" I wasn't much of a gambler, and I'd always dismissed the lottery as a fool's errand, a dream for people who wanted to escape reality without putting in the work. But Laura was right. We had nothing left to lose, and I was desperate enough to give anything a try. The following day, Laura bought a few lottery tickets. We joked about what we would do if we won, listing off everything from buying a new car to taking a vacation, things that had seemed so out of reach for so long. I didn't think much of it and returned to my long hours at the store, pushing aside the fantasy for the demands of everyday life. But a week later, everything changed. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Laura. Her voice trembled with excitement and disbelief. "You won't believe this. We won $20 million. For a moment, I was sure she was pulling my leg, but the tone of her voice and the way she was almost sobbing with joy told me this was real. I dropped everything and rushed home, my mind racing with the possibilities. We went from barely scraping by to having everything we had ever wanted. It felt surreal, like a dream we would wake up from at any moment. We moved into a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood, bought 2 luxury cars, and even splurged on a vacation to a tropical island. It was as though we were trying to make up for all the years of deprivation in a matter of weeks. We felt unstoppable, as if life had finally decided to smile on us after years of hardship. Yet, even as we basked in our newfound fortune, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. It was as though a shadow hung over our happiness, a sense that something wasn't quite right. Laura seemed to be changing, little by little. At first, it was just subtle things: spending more time shopping, becoming preoccupied with appearances. I brushed it off, figuring it was normal to indulge a bit after winning the lottery. Who wouldn't enjoy having the freedom to finally live comfortably? Still, a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering that we should be careful, that the money could change things in ways we didn't anticipate. But I pushed those thoughts aside, convincing myself that we deserved this: every penny, every luxury. After all, hadn't we struggled enough? For the first time in years, we were free from the constant stress of bills and debt. What could possibly go wrong? As the weeks went by, however, Laura's restless energy seemed to grow. She would go out more frequently, saying she was meeting friends or just enjoying life. I wanted to believe that was all. It was a harmless escape after years of living in survival mode. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it than that. The transformation in our lives was nothing short of remarkable. It felt like we had been handed a ticket out of a life sentence. We moved out of our cramped apartment and into a stunning 5-bedroom house in a gated community, complete with a pool, home theater, and more space than we could ever need. Our garage now housed 2 brand-new luxury cars that made our old clunker look like a relic. We splurged on the things we had only dreamed about: designer clothes for Laura, high-end gadgets for me, and an unforgettable vacation in the Caribbean. For a while, It felt like we were finally living the life we deserved. The tension that had once filled our home seemed to dissolve, replaced by the thrill of our newfound freedom. We no longer argued about money. We didn't need to worry about bills or count every penny. For once, everything seemed perfect. But with the luxury and excitement came subtle changes in Laura. At first, it seemed harmless enough: new hobbies, a gym membership, and joining a few upscale social clubs. I told myself she was just enjoying the benefits of our fortune, and I didn't want to be the one to rain on her parade. We had lived under a cloud for so long that it felt almost wrong to question anything that brought her happiness. Yet, as weeks turned into months, I began to notice that Laura's interests were drifting further away from what we used to enjoy together. She started going out late with her new group of friends, people we hadn't known before the win. They were the kind of friends who could afford to dine at expensive restaurants and drink champagne every other night. Sometimes, Laura wouldn't get home until the early hours, her excuses sounding thin and rehearsed. "It was just a girls' night," she would say, or "I lost track of time." I wanted to believe her. After all, we had spent so many years struggling. Didn't she deserve a little fun? But the truth was that something didn't sit right with me. Her nights out became more frequent, and our once close relationship seemed to be slowly unraveling. The closeness we had shared, even through our rough times, was fading. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial, and her phone was constantly buzzing with messages from people I didn't know. One night, while Laura was out at a club with her friends, I wandered into the garage and found one of her new luxury cars parked askew. The passenger seat was cluttered with empty champagne bottles and expensive perfume that wasn't hers. The smell lingered, sharp and unfamiliar, and a faint unease began to stir inside me. I dismissed it as paranoia, just my mind playing tricks on me because of our sudden lifestyle change. But the thought that Laura was slipping away from me grew stronger each day. Social media only deepened my suspicions. I noticed comments from unfamiliar men on her photos, men complimenting her lavish lifestyle and beauty. At first, I brushed it off as harmless attention, but when I saw that some of these men were tagging her in photos from the same clubs she had been frequenting, the knot in my stomach tightened. Who were these people? And why was she spending so much time with them? The final straw came when Laura started attending exclusive events, ones that required an invitation. She would come home late, her makeup still pristine but her demeanor different, aloof, almost distant. When I asked about her nights out, her responses were vague. "Just some networking," she'd say. "You know, getting to know the right people." Her answers didn't satisfy me, and the more I questioned, the more defensive she became. It was as if we were living in two different worlds. I was still the same person I had been before the win, happy to keep working at the store even though I no longer needed to, while Laura seemed determined to reinvent herself. She was chasing something, though I couldn't quite figure out what. The money had provided everything we thought we wanted, yet it seemed like she was always searching for more. Our relationship, once grounded by shared struggles, was now being tested by our newfound wealth. I still loved her, but I could feel a growing distance that I didn't know how to bridge. She seemed to be evolving into someone I no longer recognized, someone driven by the thrill of high society and the desire for status. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about her. The money had given us everything we had lacked: comfort, security, and freedom. But it had also opened a door to a world that I hadn't anticipated, one where the values we once held dear no longer seemed to matter. And as I watched Laura drift further away, I began to wonder if the lottery win had been a blessing or a curse. The more I tried to ignore the growing doubts in my mind, the more impossible it became to shake them. The signs were there, and they were getting harder to dismiss as mere coincidences. It wasn't just the late nights and vague explanations anymore. There was a shift in Laura's behavior that felt unsettlingly real, like a hidden truth bubbling beneath the surface. The thought of her being unfaithful seemed absurd at first, but as the days wore on, the evidence piled up. Laura started spending entire weekends away, claiming she was on short getaways with her friends or attending exclusive events out of town. When she returned, there were traces that didn't add up: receipts from luxury hotels, purchases from upscale boutiques far away from where she said she'd been. Once, I found a receipt for a dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city. She had told me she was at a friend's beach house for the weekend. When I asked her about it, she simply brushed it off, saying, "Oh, that was a while ago. I probably just forgot." But it wasn't just the little inconsistencies. Her demeanor had changed. She was more withdrawn, her temper shorter. When I tried to talk to her about what was going on, she'd snap at me or accuse me of trying to control her. "We finally have some freedom," she would argue. "Why can't I just enjoy myself without you hovering?" I didn't want to hover, but I also didn't want to be naive. I couldn't deny that the Laura I knew before the lottery win wouldn't have been so secretive, nor would she have spent so much time in places where I wasn't welcome. Her phone became a fortress. She always had it on her, locked with a new password. Sometimes I'd catch her smiling at her screen, then quickly tucking it away the moment she noticed me looking. When I asked what was so funny, she'd respond with a cold, "Nothing, just some gossip." The final straw came when I found a new piece of jewelry in her dresser, an expensive-looking bracelet I had never seen before. When I asked her where it came from, she hesitated before replying, "A friend gave it to me." I couldn't help but notice the way she avoided eye contact, the nervous tone in her voice. It felt like a lie, and I knew then that I had to do more than just confront her with questions. I needed proof. That's when I decided to search her phone. It was a risky move, but I was growing desperate. One night, after Laura had gone out yet again, I managed to get a hold of her phone while she was in the shower. I wasn't proud of it, but I felt like I had no other choice. I unlocked it using a guess her birth year, and my hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were numerous messages from a man named Chris. The tone of their conversations was more than just friendly. They were filled with inside jokes, shared memories, and plans for upcoming nights out that I knew nothing about. There was one message that stood out among the rest, sent just a few days ago. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." The words cut through me like a knife. The text continued, suggesting meetups, casual flirting, and references to intimate moments. I knew then that I wasn't imagining things my wife was seeing someone else. The confirmation brought a wave of emotions: anger, betrayal, humiliation. But I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed to know more. I needed to see it with my own eyes to believe what was happening in my own home. The next step was to install a hidden camera in the living room, the place where Laura often entertained her new friends. I placed the camera discreetly on a bookshelf, hidden among decorative items where it would go unnoticed. For the next few days, I anxiously waited, feeling a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't want to catch her in the act, but at the same time, I needed to know the full truth. It didn't take long. Just a week later, while I was supposed to be working late at the store, Laura brought Chris into our home. I watched the footage, feeling my heart sink as they laughed and talked on our couch. There was an easy familiarity between them that spoke volumes about their relationship. It was more than just a fling. There was a connection there that went beyond what I could excuse as a momentary lapse in judgment. The betrayal felt like a punch. This was our house, our home, the place we had fought so hard to keep together during the years of struggling. Now, it had become a playground for my wife and another man. The camera caught their conversations, their casual affection for each other. The way she looked at him, it was the way she used to look at me before the lottery changed everything. I confronted Laura the following evening. I told her that I knew about Chris and showed her the video evidence. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she reacted with anger, turning the blame back on me. "I'm tired of living like we're still poor," she shouted. "I deserve to enjoy the life we finally have. If you can't keep up, that's your problem, not mine." Her words stung, but her admission hurt even more. There was no remorse in her eyes, no hint of regret. She had already moved on emotionally, and I was just another relic from our old life, one she was eager to leave behind. As I walked away from that argument, I knew our marriage was over. There was no going back from this. It wasn't just the affair. It was the realization that the woman I had loved had changed so drastically that I barely recognized her. The money had turned her into someone I could no longer trust, and I wasn't about to let her drag me down with her. The signs had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. But now, there was no escaping the truth. The life we had built together was gone, replaced by a facade of luxury and betrayal. and all that was left for me was to decide how I would walk away from it. After the confrontation, there was no longer any doubt Laura had betrayed me, and our marriage was in shambles. But I wasn't going to leave this situation without getting to the bottom of everything. I needed more than just a confession or an angry argument. I needed solid evidence, the kind that would ensure I got what I deserved when it came time to divide our assets. If Laura was willing to throw away our marriage, then I would make sure she didn't walk away with everything. I started by going through her phone again, this time more thoroughly. I searched her contacts, messages, and even email for any clues that might paint a clearer picture of what she had been doing behind my back. I found several conversations with Chris, including plans for business trips that didn't exist and weekend getaways that I had never been told about. There were also messages with other people, friends, acquaintances, even some men whose names I didn't recognize. Some conversations hinted at private gatherings at nightclubs, exclusive parties, and luxury events where it seemed Laura had met these people. I needed more than just texts. I needed something concrete that could serve as undeniable proof. So, I decided to set up additional hidden cameras in the house, strategically placing them in the living room, the kitchen, and the master bedroom. Each camera was hidden discreetly to ensure Laura wouldn't notice anything unusual. I also installed a voice recorder in her car, hoping to catch any incriminating conversations while she drove around town. The days that followed were agonizing. I found myself obsessively checking the camera feeds, fast-forwarding through hours of footage, listening for any clue that might give me the upper hand. Most days, there was nothing unusual, just Laura going about her day, talking on the phone or watching TV. But then, one Friday night, I finally caught something. Laura returned home around midnight, and this time, she wasn't alone. I watched as she and Chris entered the living room, talking in low voices. There was an intimacy in their tone that made my blood boil. They settled onto the couch, and their conversation turned into laughter, then into flirtation. It was all on camera now, proof that she had been bringing him into our home, the place where we had built our life together. The following morning, I retrieved the voice recorder from her car. As I played back the audio, I heard Laura and Chris discussing time spent together, their voices filled with a casualness that implied this was routine. "You should really just move in here," Laura joked, and Chris laughed in response, saying, "If it weren't for your husband, I'd already have my things in the closet." That was it. The audacity of it, all the way they spoke about me, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in their lives, was more than I could bear. It was time to take things to the next level. I hired a private investigator to follow Laura whenever she went out, documenting her activities and providing me with detailed reports on who she was meeting, where she was going, and what she was doing. The investigator quickly confirmed what I already knew. Laura was seeing Chris regularly, and they weren't just meeting at our house. There were trips to high-end hotels, fancy dinners, and nightclubs. In almost every instance, Laura paid for everything, using the money that we had won together. The private investigator also found something I hadn't expected. There were other men involved, too. It wasn't just Chris. There were at least 2 other men Laura had been seeing on and off, men she had met at the upscale social events she frequently attended. I was stunned. It wasn't just one affair. It was a pattern of betrayal that had been going on for months. I kept gathering the evidence, making sure every piece was documented. I saved text messages, took screenshots of her social media activity, and compiled the reports from the private investigator. Each piece of evidence was like a puzzle piece that formed a clear picture of who Laura had become. She wasn't just a wife who had made a mistake. She was someone who had used the lottery winnings as an excuse to abandon our marriage and pursue a lifestyle of selfish indulgence. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it without consequences. I consulted a divorce attorney, showing him all the evidence I had collected. He told me that with this amount of proof, there was no question that I could get a favorable settlement in the divorce, including half of the winnings. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. As I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the final details of the divorce filing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, yes, and a deep sense of betrayal, but there was also a kind of relief. It was as though I was finally taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands for too long. I couldn't change what Laura had done, but I could control how I responded. With the evidence in hand and a plan set in motion, I was ready to confront Laura one last time. But this time, I wouldn't just be asking questions, I'd be setting the terms of how we would end our marriage. If she thought she could humiliate me and still walk away with everything, she was in for a rude awakening. It was time to put an end to this chapter of my life and start thinking about what came next. The moment had finally come to confront Laura with everything I had discovered. I was done playing the part of the oblivious husband. With all the evidence compiled and the legal strategy set, I felt ready. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was time for her to face the reality of what she had done. I waited until Laura was home, then set the stage for our confrontation. I placed the printed reports from the private investigator, copies of incriminating messages, and screenshots of her social media activity on the living room table. It was all their undeniable proof of her affairs. I positioned the hidden camera footage on a tablet nearby, ready to play if she dared to deny anything. As she walked in from the kitchen, I calmly called her over. "Laura, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. She looked at me with a hint of irritation, as if I was bothering her. When she saw the documents on the table, a flicker of panic crossed her face. "What is all this?" she asked, her tone defensive. "It's the truth," I replied coldly. "The truth about what you've been doing behind my back for months. About Chris, about the other men. It's all here, Laura. The late nights, the trips, even bringing him into our home. I know everything." For a moment, there was silence. She scanned the papers with wide eyes, and then her expression hardened. "You were spying on me?" she accused, her voice rising. "How dare you go through my private life?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Your private life?" I shot back. "We're married. Or at least we were. You brought this private life into our house. You flaunted your betrayal as if I wouldn't notice. Don't try to turn this on me. You're the one who's been lying and cheating." She seemed to falter, but quickly regained her composure. "You don't get it," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I was tired of living in the shadows, of always being stuck in the same boring routine. We finally had money, and I wanted to live a little. I needed excitement, something more than what we had." "So, you needed excitement?" I replied, my anger boiling over. "And your solution was to destroy our marriage? To betray the person who was with you through all the hard times?" I shook my head in disbelief. "You didn't just want excitement, Laura. You wanted to erase who you used to be. You acted like the money gave you a new life, a new identity. But in doing so, you threw away the life we built together." She opened her mouth to argue, but I interrupted her by grabbing the tablet and pressing play. The footage from the hidden camera in the living room began to play, showing Laura and Chris talking, laughing, and behaving far too familiarly. Her face went pale as she watched. There was no point in denying anything now. It was all out in the open. Her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and shame. "Fine," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Yes, I did it. I wasn't happy anymore, okay? I needed more, and you couldn't give that to me." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. "Then why didn't you just leave?" I demanded. "If you were so unhappy, why didn't you have the decency to tell me the truth instead of sneaking around behind my back?" She didn't respond right away, her gaze shifting to the floor. "I thought maybe I could have both. I thought you wouldn't notice or wouldn't care," she confessed. "And I didn't want to lose the lifestyle we had. I didn't want to give up the money. So, it was always about the money," I said quietly, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "You didn't just cheat on me, you used me. You used our win to fund your new life and your new relationships, all while stringing me along." I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "Well, you won't have to worry about it anymore," I said, my tone resolute. "I've already spoken with a lawyer. We're getting divorced, and I'll be taking half of the winnings. I don't owe you anything beyond that." Laura's face turned from defiance to shock. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. "You can't just take half the money." "Yes, I can." I cut her off, my voice firm. "We bought that ticket together. I have the evidence to prove everything you did. You can fight me on this, but it won't end well for you. You've already lost any chance of keeping this marriage, and you're about to lose half the fortune, too." She stared at me, at a loss for words. The reality of the situation was setting in, and it seemed she finally understood that there was no way out. Her deception, her new life, everything she had built on a foundation of lies was crumbling. I stood up and walked toward the door, pausing briefly. "We're done, Laura," I said with finality. "You can have your excitement, but you won't have me, and you won't have all the money either." I left the room, leaving her standing there amidst the evidence of her own betrayal, knowing that I was finally free from the life she had destroyed. The divorce proceedings went faster than I expected, with Laura ultimately conceding to my demands. She had little choice, considering the evidence I had against her. I got my half of the winnings and moved out of the house that had become a symbol of betrayal and deceit. I was free from the wreckage of our marriage, but I wasn't done yet. There was a part of me that couldn't just walk away without leaving my mark. Laura had made me feel powerless and humiliated, and I wanted her to experience a taste of what that felt like. Revenge wasn't something I had ever sought before, but this was different. It wasn't just about getting back at her. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing her that I wasn't someone she could walk all over. If she wanted to use our winnings to fuel a new life filled with new relationships, then I would do the same. Only I would make sure she knew about it. It all started at my workplace. Despite the windfall, I continued to work at the store for a while, partly because it gave me some semblance of normalcy, and partly because it kept me grounded during the chaos of the divorce. It was there that I began to notice Rachel, a young employee who had started working at the store a few months ago. She was kind, always had a smile on her face, and seemed to radiate a positivity that was refreshing. I hadn't thought much about her before, but after everything that happened, I began to appreciate the way she made work just a little bit brighter. Rachel was in her early 20s, young, confident, and full of life. She wasn't someone I would have pursued under normal circumstances, but the idea of being with her carried a certain appeal. It was partly about moving on, but it was also about showing Laura that she hadn't broken me. I saw it as an opportunity to rebuild my life on my terms, and I was determined to make it clear that I wasn't just going to fade into the background while she flaunted her new lifestyle. I began spending more time talking to Rachel during our shifts. I learned that she was a college student trying to make ends meet while working part-time, and she appreciated the stability that the job provided. As we grew more comfortable around each other, I found myself sharing parts of my story with her, not everything, of course, but enough for her to understand that I was going through a rough time. Eventually, I asked her out to dinner, and to my pleasant surprise, she agreed. We went to a nice restaurant, one of the upscale places that Laura and I used to frequent before things fell apart. It felt like reclaiming a part of my life that had been tainted by betrayal. As Rachel and I chatted over wine and steak, I could tell she was genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just as a rebound or a distraction, but as a person. It felt good, better than I had expected. Word about my new relationship quickly spread through our small social circle, and it wasn't long before it reached Laura. I could tell she wasn't taking it well. The first sign came when she called me out of the blue, pretending she needed to discuss something about the divorce settlement. It was obvious she was fishing for information about Rachel. Her voice had a hint of resentment, masked poorly by a forced, casual tone. "So, I heard you've been seeing someone," she said. "A young one, huh?" I didn't bother to hide the satisfaction in my voice. "Yeah, her name is Rachel. We've been spending a lot of time together. She's really something special." There was a brief silence on the other end before Laura responded. "Well, I hope you're happy. It just seems a little fast, don't you think?" "Maybe," I replied, but after everything, I figured there was no point in waiting around. Laura didn't have much else to say after that. I could sense the frustration in her voice, as if she hadn't expected me to bounce back so quickly. I hung up the phone, knowing full well that she had gotten the message loud and clear. She wasn't the only one who could move on, and I wasn't going to let her actions define my life. My relationship with Rachel continued to grow. We weren't just a fling or a means for revenge. There was a genuine connection there, and it helped me heal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Being with her made me realize how much of myself I had lost during the years with Laura, especially after the lottery win. I started to rediscover my own identity, one that wasn't tied to a marriage filled with false pretenses and betrayal. As for Laura, things weren't going as smoothly as she might have hoped. The excitement of her new lifestyle seemed to be wearing off. I heard through mutual friends that Chris had moved on, leaving her high and dry. She had burned bridges in her quest for something better, and now she was left with little more than the hollow remnants of the life she had tried to build. It seemed that the world she had so eagerly embraced was now rejecting her, just as she had rejected the life we once shared. My revenge wasn't some grand act of vindictiveness, it was simply moving forward without her, finding happiness in a way that she couldn't control. By the time she realized what she had lost, it was too late. I was living a new life with someone who valued me, while she was left to deal with the consequences of her choices. In the end, my greatest act of revenge was showing her that I didn't need her or the money to find happiness. I had taken back control of my life and left her behind in a world of her own making. There was a kind of poetic justice in that, and for the first time since the lottery win, I felt at peace. With the divorce finalized and my relationship with Rachel growing stronger, it felt like I was finally closing the chapter on my past. I decided it was time to make a fresh start, away from the memories and the places that reminded me of the betrayal. I sold the house and moved to a new town, a smaller, quieter place where I could rebuild my life without constantly bumping into old acquaintances and whispers about what had happened. It was a new beginning that I desperately needed. Rachel came with me, excited about the change of scenery and the possibilities it offered. We found a cozy little house just outside town, not nearly as grand as the mansion Laura and I had bought after the lottery win, but it felt like a real home, one built with genuine care rather than empty luxury. It was the kind of place where we could start building a future together, where every choice was ours to make without the shadow of my past hanging over us. I used some of the money from the divorce settlement to open a small business, something I had always dreamed of but never had the opportunity to pursue. It was a little hardware store on the main street, the kind of place where I could get to know the regulars and be a part of the community. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about finding purpose and satisfaction in the simple things. It gave me a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for so long. Rachel, for her part, continued her studies while working part-time at the shop. She brought a youthful energy to the store, making it a welcoming place for customers. We grew closer through the little moments, sharing lunch at the counter, chatting with customers, and laughing at the small absurdities of daily life. She helped me see the brighter side of things, reminding me that there was still good in the world even after everything I had been through. As for Laura, I heard from mutual friends that her life had taken a turn for the worse. Without Chris or the other men, and with a reputation stained by the choices she had made, she struggled to find the same thrill she once craved. The money she had kept was dwindling faster than she expected, eaten up by her extravagant lifestyle and failed attempts to hold on to the social circles that had once welcomed her. I felt no satisfaction in her misfortune. If anything, it was a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart when driven by selfish desires. I had no interest in rekindling any connection with her. She was a part of my past, a chapter that was closed for good. I had no ill will toward her, but I also had no sympathy. We had both made our choices, and now we were living with the consequences. The difference was that I had found a way to move forward, while she remained stuck in a life that was slipping away. Letting go of the anger and resentment took time, but with each passing day, it became easier. I realized that holding on to the bitterness would only keep me tied to the pain. I wanted more than that. I deserved more than that. Rachel and I started talking about the future, about the kind of life we wanted to build together. It wasn't rushed or driven by some need to fill a void. It was genuine, grounded in the connection we had formed through mutual respect and shared experiences. In time, the scars from my past began to fade. The betrayal that had once defined me was no longer the center of my story. It was just something that happened, a turning point that had led me here to a better life. I found peace in the small joys, working in the store, spending quiet evenings with Rachel, and planning for the future with a sense of optimism that I hadn't felt in years. Moving on wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and choosing to live better despite it. I had lost a marriage but gained a new understanding of what truly mattered in life. I let go of the bitterness and embraced the freedom that came with starting over. In the end, I wasn't defined by the lottery win or the betrayal. I was defined by how I chose to move forward, by finding happiness in the simple, genuine things that Laura had never appreciated. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I found a future worth living for.